Oh, okay. Okay, I think we can start because it's already being streamed.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Gurpreet. Can you hear my voice?
Very clear, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, okay. Okay. So, in fact, in MDI 007, as I was saying last time, we'll start, and if whoever wants to join can join. As I said, please read MDI 7 and 8 together. Do not read them as separate, in the sense, read them together. And I would suggest read MDI 8 first, then read 7, because more often than not, 8 is about production process, and one will understand that as production processes changed, the labor movement happened. In fact, why we are studying labor, and both 7 and 8, FDI 7 and 8 are economic topics. Why we are studying economic topic? Because economics determine a large part of migration. In fact, when industrial revolution happened and there was a large scale mechanization and privatization, there was major disruption in both social, economic, and political spheres. And this disruption caused major movement of people, major migrations. So today also a large part of migration is because of employment, is because of finding a better future, a perceived better future, because better is a very relative word, very subjective word. So this is how we are doing, and in this unit and 2 and 3, in fact, I've mixed. I've taken a part of unit 3, not everything. Where unit 3 is talking about alternative perspectives on labor. Also understand, the whole concept of migration and diaspora is an interdisciplinary subject. One can look at any aspect of migration or any aspect of labor from various perspectives. You can look at it from an economic perspective, you can look at it from a sociological perspective, and so on and so forth. So, I have combined both these units. Just a quick recap of unit 1, what we talked about, to get a chain, and for people who were not there in the last session, to get us a tie back or a sense of what is going on. Economic growth is a quantitative concept. The idea of a quantitative concept is, once you have numbers, you can manipulate the numbers. It's easier to understand numbers in graphs. And I think that's has been the problem for economists right from when the subject of economics started. They have not been able to quantify labor. Just a sec. So they have not been able to quantify labor, and various stories. And as I've also been telling, and I shall repeatedly tell you, economics is not a science, so you cannot experiment with economic theories or economic concepts in a lab and figure out whether they work or not. Economics look at the context. In fact, today we are living in a very interesting time where the US president has imposed tariff. Everything that the world has achieved over a period of time in terms of free trade, in terms of movement of good, in terms of transnationalism, has all been unraveled with US imposing tariffs on other countries. China yesterday reciprocated with a similar tariff on the US. There is a NAFTA agreement, North American trade free trade agreement. Uh, in spite of that, the US seems to be putting tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So how does this pan out? So how will it pan out? And what is happening in US in terms of deportations, in terms of kidnapping or abduction of immigrants? as we have been talking about, in fact, the whole US economy works on the basis of immigrants. They don't have enough workforce to work a native workforce, and they need immigrants. So how will this pan out? We will see as it goes along. But nevertheless, a whole lot of economists are talking about recessionary trends. The stock markets are going down across the world. We are in very, as the Chinese proverb says, may you live in interesting times. These are very interesting times. So, coming back, economic growth is quantitative. More often than not, till to a large extent, economists had always defined growth in terms of GDP or GNP. Somewhere down the line, they realized the fact that it was not just the numbers or the economies which made a difference, because at the end of the day, nation is comprised of citizens, and unless the well-beings of its people are taken into consideration, those numbers mean nothing. And that's how development came as a concept. It's a quantitative concept. Uh, 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 so basically, you need to have qualitative, but it is a qualitative concept. So you need to have quantitative, but at the same time, you need to have qualitative changes, because at the end of the day, if your economy is growing in terms of numbers, but the people are unhappy, there is undernourishment, there is famine, it really doesn't make a difference. Development aims at economic, social, and political well-being of people. No single definition or prescription of development evolved over time to accommodate and appropriately fulfill the development goals of different societies. Again, development is relative. When we say betterment of life, it's a very relative term. Some people feel betterment is moving from rural areas to cities, even though in cities they are in slums. The quality of life is much worse, but people feel it's better because they are able to earn a livelihood, send money. So betterment is a very relative term. Why development? Because freedom retains the central focus of human development approach. So economists also started moving towards the development concept. Famine, undernourishment, morbidity, absence of provision of basic needs are unfreedoms. And if a nation is having an economic growth but is not able to provide these things, then obviously they said that the nation, and that's where the concept of human development index came in. Also, quantitative typically captures marketable products. So when you are talking about GDP, GNP, you're talking about marketable products, but non-market goods and services like home consumption of groups, natural resources, women's contribution are not captured in any economic index. And when they are not captured, you do not know what's going on. Qualitative measures includes PQLI, Human Development Index. HDI is a better form of PQLI because HDI is made up of qualitative as well as quantitative factors. So let's look at Unit 2 and 6, role and contribution of labor. Again, as I said, economists, right from industrial revolution and the development of the subject of economics, try to understand or quantify labor. And we shall look at the fact, why is it difficult to quantify labor? Because labor is an embodiment of the human being. Central element of development process, all goods, all services we consume, all property, wealth, etc., are all a product of labor. More often than not, we understand labor as manual labor. When we see daily wager, we call them laborers. But labor is not just the daily wages. Everything that you do, everything a human does is labor. Emergence and development of communities, settlements, civilization are all linked to the contribution of labor. The pyramids were made out of labor. The canals, the highways, everything is constructed, is used labor. Labor is often to denote the lowest rung. Holistic approach includes all work, manually or intellectually, is labor. When we are writing an assignment, we are putting in labor. When we are writing an examination, we are putting in labor. It's an intellectual labor. Almost everything works comes under the broader term labor. So people migrate for manual work, people migrate for professional work. At the end of the day, it's all work and it's categorized as labor. Also used as a superset, including subsets as worker or unemployed. Workforce and labor. So these are now new terms which get introduced, as I told you in last time. Do keep a pen or a paper, or on your laptop, you can copy paste and keep this keyword somewhere separately. You can look and search for those keywords to elaborate on them in terms of either more information or information in terms of a knowledge, or information in terms of writing an assignment or an examination. So, what is workforce and labor force? They are used interchangeably, but they have different meaning. Labor force refers to the total number of people who are employed or actively seeking employment in a particular country or region. Both employed and unemployed individuals who are available and actively seeking work is labor force. The workforce refers to total number of people who are currently employed, self-employed, or working as independent contractors. So even if you're self-employed, you come in workforce because you are, doing some economic activity which gets you some money. Just a second. So that's the essential difference between labor force and workforce. So there might be a bigger labor force and smaller workforce because they are based on an unemployment. The labor force is much higher. Now, labor, as I said, is a unique factor of production. Neoclassical economics, labor is simply understood as one of the four factors. So, other four factors being land, capital, and entrepreneurship. Land, you can, quantify. Capital, you can quantify. Labor is something you cannot quantify, cannot be limited as a mere factor of production, because at the end of the day, the capital and the land follows supply and demand. But with people, there might be a demand, but the person might refuse to work based on some irrational criteria, rational or irrational criteria. Many a unique feature of labor, uh, unique vis-a-vis other factors of production. So labor is a unique vis-a-vis other factors of production. So one is inseparability of labor power from labor. The ownership of labor is inseparable and non-transferable for the person who possesses the labor power. So if you have a plumber, you can't take the skill of plumbing from the plumber. You need to have that plumber. While it is possible to separate the commodities that are bought and sold in the rest of the market, it's not possible for the labor market to deal with labor power. So labor market is another term. We'll come to what is labor market later. But at the end of the day, labor is inseparable from the person who possesses. It's an embodiment of the human being. Dual role or contribution of labor in the economy as a factor of production and as a consumer. So it's the labor which produces a product and it's the labor which consumes that product. Because at the end of the day, if a demand does not get generated, now another term we are introducing is demand. So in economics, the concept of demand becomes important. Labor market. So we got four new concepts. We got a labor power, we got labor force, we got workforce, we got the concept of demand, and we got the concept of labor market. And over and over again in MDI 7 and 8, we'll come across these concepts. While the first role of labor has been widely recognized in terms of contribution to the economy, the demand generation capacity of labor is. So now, here the interesting part comes. Now, in India specifically, over the last few years, there have been major discussions on the concept of the new term, which is called freebies. In actual economic terms, these are called welfare measures, but in political terms, they are called freebies. Now, the point is, let's look at a very interesting example. So, when Delhi government came out with a scheme whereby they said that women in Delhi Transport Corporation, the state-run, public transport corporation, will not have to pay money to travel. Now, uh, politically, it was a freebie because you are giving a service free of cost. The term freebie comes from a service free of cost. However, when you look at a welfareism in terms of a state welfare activity, now essentially for every rupee that the female is saving in travel, that rupee will go somewhere. There are only two places that money saved can go. The money saved can either go into saving in terms of bank, post office, a lottery or something, or the second that money will be used for creating a demand for a product. Now, if in the first case, if the money is saved in a bank or wherever, the government tends to get that money to invest in infrastructure and other schemes. If that person uses that money to create a demand, then again it goes into the state's economy to increase production, whereby give more jobs, whereby increase GDP. Look at the cycle. However, it is a political debate because how the media structures it and presents it to you. But at the end of the day, any money which goes free into the pocket of the citizens or in the pocket of the labor force is used to create a demand, because nobody will take a money and dig a hole and put it inside. Nobody does that. The money is either saved in a financially institution, or it is used to create demand. There is no third way. It can be used for consumption, which could be a non-demand consumption, like again, even if it is consumed for, let's say, a marriage or a birthday celebration, there is a demand for those products. There's a demand for hospitality, there's a demand for DJs. There is an economy which moves.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Gurpreet.
Sir, the free electricity to the farmers in Punjab from the last 25, 30 years.
Correct.
It has the same fate as you explained in case of free traveling money
Correct.
to the public.
Correct.
It has the same fate.
So, Gurpreet, we need to understand another engine that we have not explained in this economic part. The second engine is the political engine. The farmers are a big political lobby, and inevitably each political party is looking at giving free electricity to take care of their constituency in terms of winning an election. So now don't mix up the uh, a good politics can be good economics, a good politics can be bad economics.
Sir.
So, for example, there has been a lot of debate in terms of reservations. Now, obviously, in the Constitution, they talked about reservation for 10 years. There was a context to the reservation. The context of the reservation was that there were certain communities which were given, a bad treatment based on the caste system, and these communities need to have a positive affirmation for them to come forward. So, then it became a political thing. Now, inevitably, unless there are wider discussions in terms of politics and economics, it becomes extremely difficult to kind of argue for or against. So, Gurpreet, as a person might think it is bad economics, nobody has brought out a white paper to say how is it a bad this politics, how is it a bad economics, or how is it a good economics. We are told that anything which is free is bad. May not be. Gurpreet.
Sir, got it, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So, hang on. The contribution of labor in generating effective demand. Purchasing power was emphasized, highlighted by Keynes in his general theory. We will do Keynesian economics, we'll do a little bit of Marxian economics. I will get you to briefly understand. As I said, more often than not, what I have tried to do is I have not taken the unit or MDI 7 as an economic subject, but as a general understanding of economics. So I've kept it as simple as possible. I have not brought in any equations. I have not brought in any economic. There are economic concepts, but I've tried to simplify it as simple as so that everybody who's not an economic student can understand. Great Depression of 1930 was a resultant of lack of effective demand. In fact, there are economists who are talking about this particular round of tariffs. The last time tariffs were introduced by the US was before the depression sets in. Sorry. In fact, the last time US brought in tariffs on the world, it led to the Great Depression. So a lot of economics are now foreseeing a depression, another round of Great Depression in the world. Let's see how it pans out. Because if demand is not there, and this is what is happening, for example, in India, you would be reading the news item, the demand for two-wheelers is not there, the demand for cars is not there. Rural demand has come down because if the people will not have money in their pocket, the demand will not be there. And if the demand is not there, it's a cyclic process. No demand, production cuts down, unemployment rises, further demand reduces, and so on and so forth. Indivisibility of labor power from labor. You cannot separate the labor from labor power. It's the labor which provides the power. And it's a repetitive interaction, provides opportunity for both the workers and the employees to arrive at a long-term and cost-saving arrangement. And inevitably, unless the labor and the employer are working in some sort of a negotiated settlement, it will be a loss to everything. What is happening today? For example, I'll keep coming back to this tariff. What will typically happen when the US puts in tariff? It's actually the US customers who are suffering because let's say there is a demand for X product which comes from, let's say, India. And if the US puts 26% tariffs on India, then the product which is in demand from India will be given to the US customer at a hike of 26%. And we have seen historically that tariffs in this globalized, transnational, connected world actually is a lose-lose situation because everybody will suffer. So that's why I said, unless we have reached a point of globalization that anything which is done anywhere is going to affect the whole world. For the workers, it's beneficial to arrive at a long-term work contract to avoid job searching, reduce cost on account. And even this interaction is, it has to be both ways. Provides opportunities for periodic revision of wages. So if you have a stable workforce, it is better for the employer because at the end of the day, he does not keep needing to search a workforce because all this searching, training, getting a new workforce, understanding is a cost for the employer. Similarly, all this moving is a cost for the worker. So it is, so what they are saying, that is why it is a unique factor of production. Also, labor is heterogeneous, it's not homogeneous. No two persons are the same. That is why when media stereotypes peoples and communities, that's the role of media because stereotype is the way people understand. But no two people are the same, no two communities are the same. If one person has done some certain thing, the need not be the other person will do the same thing. No two children in a family are the same, in spite of the fact they are an offspring of the same set of parents. Personal characteristics and human resource endowments. Capability of workers vary considerably based on skill level, education, training, caste, also on environment, in terms of what a person is able to perceive intellectual capabilities. It's much more complex than what we understand. Also brings in various subsections and sub markets for labor. Labor is an exception to many rules of conceptualization that are applicable to other commodities. A commodity traded in the market doesn't have feelings in the trade. With people, there is a concept of feeling. If I like a person, for example, I called up a carpenter on the phone, never met him, never knew who he was. He didn't know me. I introduced myself and I said, "Tum aa jana." And he says, "आपकी बात करने का तरीका मुझे पसंद नहीं आया." He had feelings. He took exception to the word "tum." So I said, "You do not know my age. I'm much more older, so I'm using a tum." So labor comes with feelings. Now that makes labor, very tricky. An increase or decrease of wages, salaries will immediately reflect on and then it reflects on the well-being. And that's one of the reasons why the industry is now looking at automation, it is looking at robots, it's looking at artificial intelligence, because economists and the industry wanting to make more profit cannot understand or deal with the feelings of human beings and their well-being and their happiness. It's a messy thing. And that's what is called the backward bending supply curve of labor. So it's not just you keep increasing the wages of a person and the labor is happy. There might be some other consideration. So it's a backward bending curve. So if you look in the unit, there are some economic formulas, there is a curve. As I said, unless you're an economic student, do not get stuck on those curves and the formulas. Just understand the larger part so that you are able to answer an assignment, write the examination, and have a general understanding of the whole concept of labor and migration. While most commodities in the market abide by certain norms, rules of supply and demand. In the case of labor, it may not also be. There might be a demand for labor in, let's say, Bombay, but a guy sitting in some village in Bihar may not want to travel outside for whatever reason, because of family commitment, because he does not like Bombay, he does not like the weather out there. It could be so many things. A normal good has a tendency of moving towards those market where it fetches a higher price, provided there is free mobility. Mobility of a worker is determined by many other factors. So, for example, today mobility of worker to the US is determined by the inhospitable immigration conditions set in by the American, state. For example, I was reading about the fact their immigration policies are such, they have this ICE unit in terms of immigration, customs, and whatever. They are abducting immigrants and putting them in detention center. Why? Because these are for-profit units. These are contractors. For every abduction they do and put in the detention unit, they get money. So they are paid for abducting immigrants, valid or invalid. There have been many cases of Canadian nationals, Indian nationals, German nationals who have been abducted and put in detention centers because they're getting paid. The backward bending tendency of supply curve of labor can be explained as a trade-off between work and leisure preference of the labor. The labor says, I don't want this work because I want to sleep right now. It is understood that higher levels of income, the labor prefers leisure to work. So with the human labor, there is the concept of leisure. So the interesting things which have happened because of mobile and internet is the fact that today you can see any manual labor also at any place who is unemployed but has got a mobile and is getting entertained in terms of leisure. He or she is sitting and seeing a mobile. So that's the backward bending supply curve. Uh, Labor and development is an interdisciplinary approach. And this is what we are taking from the unit 3 in terms of various ways to look at labor. There are challenges like environment, ecological degradation, climate change, man-made conflicts, genocide, migration. All are interconnected, cannot be separated from each other. So, for example, again, coming back, this tariffs, how it works out in terms of, effects which can be foreseen, and there will be effects which cannot be foreseen. And remember, economics is one engine, but climate change is another engine which is happening. And you know what happens if, and look at the fact there is a major earthquake which has happened in Myanmar, obviously, which will lead to migration of people from that region outside. So there are multiple engines at work today in the world. Explosion of new technology of information and communication brought to cultures and society. Technology is changing the way work is being performed today, with technology coming in, with artificial intelligence coming in, with softwares, computers coming in. If the worker has to constantly move about, and that's why I said MDI 8 becomes important to read before 7, because M8 talks about various ways the production technologies are changing, the way the production of products and the way services are being delivered itself is changing. We now have what is called a gig economy. The reason why it's called a gig economy is the term gig has been taken from the music industry. Temporary, short term. So, what is a gig economy? It needs younger people, younger mobile people. What happens to older people who can contribute to the labor force or to the workforce? They will not get work, so they will become unemployed. Everything is becoming younger in terms of the interaction. What happens with computers coming in? A whole lot of older bureaucrats, older professionals do not know how to deal with apps the way youngsters can do. The study of labor and development lends itself to interdisciplinary analysis, cannot be adequately captured with single discipline. Labor is connected with complex processes, environmental integration, human conflict, and bound to inflect migration as well as labor markets. And then globalization has resulted in new forms of work, new forms of labor, different from industrial or agricultural labor in undertaking. So, why this interdisciplinary study? To be able to understand the various aspects of understanding labor. We cannot just study labor from an economic aspect. Say, for example, economic dimension, child labor, cause and result of poor financial background of household. Child labor is an additional pool of labor used conventionally for depressing wages in the economy. Recently, there was this news item where there was an explosion in a factory in Gujarat. 21 people died, among which were children as young as 6 years old. Why use children? And they said the parents were earning 100 to 200 rupees a day. Think about the fact in today's time and age, earning 100 rupees a day. In fact, Gujarat has one of the highest cases of malnutrition. And the reason why capitalists use children is to depress wages. Then there is a sociological dimension. Social backwardness is leading to incidents of child labor. Caste system, directing the entry of child as a designated occupation and denying them the opportunity of education. There has been again a perspective which says that if you are giving child an employment, you are helping the family. That's a wrong perspective, because at the end of the day, children are supposed to get educated, go to, there was this NGO that I was interacting, and I asked this NGO who were working in children's education the same question. And this guy from the NGO asked me, would you send your child for work and not for education? And I said, no. He says, then why is your child designated for education and a poor man's child designated for work? At the end of the day, you're giving the child a skill. So if you are contributing, if the state is contributing towards education, it's actually an asset that you are building, because done always gets returned. That's also an economic. Are you able to hear me? I can see unstable network. Can you hear me, guys?
Sir, sir, very clear, sir.
Yes, sir.
Voice is clear.
Okay, okay.
Yes, sir.
Suddenly I got a message, unstable network. So I said, let me check. So you see, there are multiple dimensions to look at labor, which is what Unit 3 is talking about. Legal dimension, use of law as a discipline to understand the regulation and prohibition aspects. History, why certain societies have greater incidence of child labor. As I was giving the example last time, during the Industrial Revolution, Charles Dickens wrote his novels during the Industrial Revolution. He himself came out of school, had to go because his father was interned. He had to go to school and then come. He had to go and work in a factory and then come back and finish his schooling. History is a great way to understand whatever is happening today. So, for example, if possibly the president of US might have read history, he would have figured out that 1930 happened because of tariffs by then President Hoover. I think President Hoover was there. So what is a labor market? Conception of a labor in a neoclassical economics, like any other commodity or factor of production, price and quantity of labor determined by market forces. Intersection of respective curves of demand for and supply of labor. This demand supply. So the capitalist system works on demand supply. Labor market is nothing but an institution. There is no physical labor market. It's an institution. How the supply and demand are matched in terms of labor. So, for example, you have a vegetable market where the supply and demand of vegetables are met. You have a commodity market where the supply, for example, in Delhi, Khawdi Wali is a wholesale market where supply and demand are met. Similarly, you have a labor market, which is a social institution in terms of labor and supply and demand. Then there is a new term called marginal product of labor. Company's total output increase when it adds a single labor unit and production factors do not change. So how companies figure out their profitability? What happens if we add one more unit of labor? Production factors do not change. What happens in terms of production and in terms of profit? And that is why so for example, yesterday I was seeing, because of these tariffs, how job losses have already started in the US and the Canadian auto markets. Because obviously they are forecasting demand. Based on the forecasting demand, they are looking at reducing or cutting down on production. Cutting down on production means shelving labor. Companies often experience an increase in MPL, marginal product per labor, upon hiring new talent or improving production capabilities through innovation. Monitoring this number can help a company identify a phenomena known as the law of diminishing marginal returns. So you can keep marginal product of labor somewhere noted down, and the diminishing marginal return sub it down, and just do a Google and see how simply you can understand this in terms of in terms of an answer or in terms of understanding the larger concept. Don't get into the formulas. Don't get into unless you are an economic student. Don't get into it. Growing realization of fallacy of
Margin, what we have
yeah
to see, what we have to
yes
see, marginal production of labor
and diminishing marginal return.
diminish,
Diminishing, Sanjeev,
marginal,
marginal product of labor
yeah,
and diminishing marginal returns.
return. So we need to see that what is the major difference.
Just if you want to read more about it, Google
Okay.
it and find out.
Okay,
Because inevitably a lot of economics works on marginal product of labor and diminishing marginal returns. So more often than not, the way you function or any company functions, what if I add one more engineer? What will be the marginal product of the labor of adding one more resource?
okay,
And what will be the marginal product of labor if I remove that resource? That's how hiring and firing happens.
okay, sir.
And diminishing marginal return is, see, you have a field where you have a field of wheat and you want to harvest that field of wheat. Now you will put in labor to harvest that field.
Yes.
But now you calculate, do I, for 1 acre of field, how many labor I require?
Yes.
Can I, if I need 10 labor, if I put 11, do I get a diminishing marginal return? I mean, or do I, if I remove one labor, does the return diminish or it remains the same?
Okay.
So inevitably, that's how companies hire and fire people.
Okay.
If I don't need this person, how much change will happen? So, because each person is associated with a salary, but not just a salary, there are other, costs associated with the person. There is possibly a PF, there is possibly a medical expense, there is possibly the point that he or she drinks coffee, tea, lunch, electricity, so on and so forth.
Cost factors may increase.
Correct?
Cost factors may increase.
Correct. Absolutely. Each person has a cost to the company.
Right.
You cannot treat labor as another commodity. You have to view labor in a more careful and realistic manner, improving and innovating ways of looking at labor. So inevitably, economists also understand and capitalists also understand how to engage with labor. Also, the labor movement or the labor itself has gone through curves. For example, in the last unit we saw that during the industrial revolution there was no acts to protect labor. In fact, the British Parliament passed a law that labor could not unionize. Subsequently, after the industrial revolution, labor this thing happened, labor unions happened, laborers came together to politically fight for themselves, made labor parties or socialist parties. And now we are again reaching another part of the curve where the labor unions, trade unions do not hold that much sway as they were in the 80s. And also, now these terms, neoclassical economists to institutional economists, we shall read as we go along. Institution is a larger, like for example, the institution of marriage. It's not a physical thing, but the way the way things are structured or the way things are constituted. Labor market is nothing but a social institution. So there is no physical institution of a labor market. But how do wages get determined? How do companies recruit? Several social and labor market institutions, including caste, local societies, trade unions, to explain the condition. So the condition of labor itself has changed over a period of time. As I said, from no laws to support them, or no welfare laws, to welfareism, to trade unions, a political backing, to again coming back into a lot of contractual, and as we shall see in MDI 8, in terms of institutions, in terms of neoclassical is same, it's a new form of classical theory. So again, as I said, there will be some areas where your understanding will not come immediately, but as you read, these terms will make sense. Okay, so situating labor in the change context of development with HDI, the Human Development Index, components including health and education and income, the health and employment, and that's where the company started bringing in health benefits. They brought in education. So you see how from industrial revolution things have progressed, in the sense the states understood and the politics understood the fact that these labor are unique. They need to be taken care of in, and if they are taken care of, they would produce better results, leading to more profit. And that is why, say for example, the new companies like Facebook, Google, and so on and so forth give phenomenal amount of recreation and other opportunities for its employees, so that these employees then get hooked to the company and are able to produce more for the company, which falls under the larger ambit of HDI or development economics. Trends such as automation, globalization will influence labor markets and subsequently, and all these things are getting influenced by each other. Technology advancements can lead to shifts in job titles and required skills. It can lead to shifts in the average age of people working. It can lead to unemployment if the people are not adequate trained. And we have seen a whole lot of people who do not have requisite skills today have moved into the gig economy. So all these things are affecting each other. So let's look at some major theories on wages and employment, because with labor is associated to additional concept, wages and employment. Right from the period of classical thinkers, there have been different ways of looking at labor, how wages are decided. See, again, the battle of economists is capital understood, easily moved, land understood, easily moved. In fact, the first attack was on land in terms of privatization, getting the land to be together, or consolidation of land, moving capital from this. Labor is something which the economists and the capitalists have not been adequately able to wrap their head around. So there have been various theories. It started off with classical economics, moved into various other ways, which we'll study in MDI 8, about how Marx came about in his concept of labor, about how Keynes came in terms of understanding of his labor. And then there are the new classical thinkers, or the new liberal economics, what the latest which is working on. How wages are decided in economic labor markets, how employment and wages are connected, how does population growth and economic progress determine labor market outcomes. The economy, as I said, it's not a science, so you cannot experiment with it. So what is happening is these people study the various trends which are going at that moment of time, and try and get out a policy prescription. So in MDI 8, when we study, we look at Marx, we look at how Marx looked at labor and came out with his policy prescription. How Keynes, during his time of Great Depression, looked at how the markets functioned and came out with his policy prescription. And you will figure out that subsequent time, whatever had been prescribed earlier has changed, because the whole production process is changing, because the whole world economies are changing, the production processes are changing, leading to change in the way labor is looked at, engaged, employment is given, wages are given, so on and so forth. And government keeps fluctuating between whether they need to engage with the labor market in terms of make laws or not make laws. So it's like in our life, there was a time when they used to say parents should have quality time with the children. Then they said, no, what do you mean by having quality time? Now parents should be continuously engaged. So these concepts keep on varying as time goes by. So let's look at a classical or subsistence theory. Broadly, I will explain in terms of classical. Focuses on the idea that value of labor is related to basic needs of workers. That's why it's called classical. That's how initially, when industrial revolution was happening, this is how the economists figured out how to deal with labor. Essentially, workers need to earn enough to cover their essential needs like food, shelter, and clothing. If wages go much higher than this, it might lead to an increase in population, which then puts downward pressure on wages. Conversely, wages are too low, workers may not be able to sustain themselves, leading to lower productivity and potential higher wages in the long run. So essentially, the classic was very simple. Classical theory was very simple. Supply and demand. Everything works on supply and demand. And the wages should be enough to cover basic needs. We know now this does not work. But this was the time when economists were first formulating labor policies or understanding labor. That's the classical theory. Supply and demand as basic needs. Wages adjust to ensure that workers' basic needs are met, and this balance helps to maintain stability in economy. Particularly the idea of economist Adam Smith. Adam Smith was the person who talked about classical economics, also was the talk, used to say that government should not interfere in the capitalist model or in the labor markets. Government is not, let the supply and demand take care of itself. The supply and demand will ensure that the capitalist is able to make profit and the labor is able to get an employment and maintain his subsistence needs. In an era when the economic conditions were different from today. Obviously, this came about during the industrial era. So this was the classical or subsistence theories. Then there were the efficiency theories. Again, I am not delving too much into the theories. I don't think so. You will have compare different theories as a question which might come in your end term examination. If at all, they might be write short notes on the classical theories or something where you can easily explain. So for example, as I explained, classical theories about supply and demand, about subsistence of labor. Efficiency theory suggests that employer might pay workers more than the market rate to boost their productivity. And in fact, when the factory model came in and Ford came up with this factory line, he came up with a higher payment to higher wages to the workers to ensure that they are satisfied and the attrition in the factory line will not happen. Paying higher wages can actually make workers more efficient and productive due to motivation, attraction, more skilled and talented workers, and retention, which is what Ford did, which we use the term Fordism, which we shall read in the subsequent unit. There are two terms we shall read: Fordism and Taylorism. Very important terms with the coming of the Industrial Revolution. Sometimes lead to wage differences between companies, as those offering higher wages might attract better workers. It can also help explain why wages don't always fall in times of economic downturns. In fact, today also, one of the things is in terms of economic downturns, more often than not, companies do not cut wages. More often than not, because cutting wages can lead to dissatisfaction. So they may fire workers to keep their profits intact, but they try not to cut wages. So when the Indian companies actually reduced wages during COVID time, it set a bad precedent. They didn't reduce wage, actually, they held back some wage. Sorry, they didn't cut wage because the wages came back to normal post COVID. But during COVID time, they cut wage, which actually depressed the economy.
Sir,
Yes, Sanjeev.
sir, with the US imposing tariffs on all countries, will it lead to any labor unrest or something like that?
See,
will it affect any labor class?
Sanjeev, so now look at the fact, if India is a major partner to the US in terms of handicrafts, in terms of agriculture produce, and many other things. So now if Indian products become expensive,
Sir.
yeah,
Sir.
and US companies are able to source cheaper products from somewhere else, obviously the demand for Indian products goes down. If the demand for Indian products goes down and the Indian exporters are not able to find alternate markets, then obviously they'll cut back on their production. Cutting back on their production will lead to shedding labor force.
Yes.
Shedding labor force will lead to decrease in demand in the local market. We are already seeing a depressed demand in the local market.
So it will have an overall impact.
It will have an over. See, obviously, Sanjeev, because everything is now connected with everything else.
Yes. Yes.
And again, as I said, more often than not, today in this globalized world, there are foreseen, things which happen, and there are unforeseen things which happen, which we do not know, which are X factors. So, for example, as I gave an example, the Ukraine-Russian war led to global increase of food prices because Ukraine is a major supplier of wheat.
Sure.
So now you can decide on ideological fronts. I like this versus this. Inevitably, everybody gets affected.
Sure.
Okay.
So overall, it will be, resulting into a negative impact more.
It will, see, we do not know how much negative, but definitely it will impact everybody. And we have already seen in the last 2 days, the stock markets across the world have fallen. The US stock markets have fallen by 3%. Yesterday, the Indian stock market went down by about 1.5%, 2%.
Sir.
So inevitably, look at the fact that, stock market means that money, which is notional, is getting wiped out.
Yes.
So obviously, and remember, financial markets work on sentiments. So if tomorrow you get a sentiment that, possibly there is a recession coming, you will cut back on your spending. You cut back on your spending, the demand, and if there are 10 people like you, obviously the demand goes down. Demand goes down, the production goes down. Production goes down, unemployment rises because jobs are shed. It can go then anywhere.
Sir.
Okay?
Sir.
Okay. So after the classical theory, there was something called a neoclassical theory. Focuses on how labor markets work based on supply and demand, much like the other markets. Why it's a neoclassical is a new classical. So it very much borrows from the classical theory, but it's a new classical. The wages, how much workers are paid, and the amount of work, how many hours, are determined by the supply of labor, the number of people to work, and the demand of labor, number of workers. Typically, how Uber and search pricing works: supply and demand. More demand, less supply, prices go up. So neoclassical talks about supply. In fact, the classical did not talk about, let's go back. Classical, is talking about subsistence. Classical is more of a subsistence. The neoclassical is the supply demand. How much supply, how much demand. And both these theories are talking about governments not interfering. It's basically supply demand. Demand for labor, companies want to hire workers up to the point where the cost of hiring another worker, the marginal, productivity of labor, another worker equals the additional value the workers bring to the company, their productivity. So if by hiring another person, the productivity does not go up, there's no need for hiring another worker. Workers,
Sir,
yeah.
yes, can I ask what
Yes,
question?
Domingo.
Yes.
Yes,
I
Domingos.
want to know, the tax can influence directly the labor market?
Yes, of course. Listen, if you tax people more, the money which was, again, as I said, when money is there in people's pockets, they're going to do two things with it. They are going to either save it or they're going to spend it. If they are going to save it, the state is able to use that money which the people are saving to work in infrastructure and other projects or welfare needs. If they are going to consume it, then that consumption will lead to demand for products. So either which way, if there is money in people's pocket, it is good for the economics of the country. Now, when you tax it, people do not have money in their pocket. Obviously, the government gets it, but how does the government use it? Government will anyway get it if the people save. But now with taxing, the sentiment goes down. Remember, finance works on sentiments. If you are a happy person with money in your pocket, you are more happy than you are a happy person with no money in your pocket. Domingos?
Yes, got it, sir.
So it will definitely, and that is why during the COVID times, most of the Western economies gave money to their citizens. Okay, please, now we are giving you money, use it. And as I said, people will either save or spend. Both ways are good for the government. Also understand the fact, if your taxes are not liberalized or are unjust, then people will try and hide those incomes, and then that money becomes a black economy. So your country actually loses, because what can be done legally, say for example, you get your immigration barriers high. Now people will continue to still move. So now what they will do is, what the country can earn in terms of passports, visas, and etc., will now go to the smugglers, because now illegal means will come about. So there has to be a balance between high walls of doing, or barriers to do things, and completely let it go. So the country needs to discuss and figure this out. And economists and other people, because it's an interdisciplinary field, you can't just look at the economists. You have to look at the sociologists, you have to look at the other people. How does this work out so that at the end of the day, people have money in their pockets? Domingos?
Yes, got it, sir.
Okay.
Maybe that's why many people are moving to Emirates.
Absolutely. People are going into the Middle East because their tax structures are so liberal that it's legally that they are earning that money. When they have that money, they will spend it. And that is why most of the companies today are getting registered in the Middle East. The businesses are coming in the Middle East, the investments are coming in the Middle East, because why would somebody want to break their head with so many barriers to doing stuff which helps everybody? And in fact, for the state itself tends to lose out if you raise your barriers. Domingos?
Yes, sir. Yes, got it.
Okay.
Makes sense. Yes.
So, demand and supply of labor, wages and employment levels reach a balance or equilibrium with the number of workers that the employer wants to hire matches the number of workers willing to work. Now, this theory it appears to be ideal, but it is not. But remember the fact that these theories all came in a particular time frame. If wages are too high, employers might hire fewer workers. More expensive, conversely, wages are too low, workers might not be willing to work. What I gave you the example of surge pricing in, let's say, Uber. Now, if the demand is high, supply is low, they increase their prices. Now, as a customer, you might feel cheated. So, neoclassical theory was propounded at a particular time in the history of economic theories. All these theories have their pluses, all these theories have their negatives. Do not get stuck with that this theory is perfect. There is no perfect theory because these are theories. Considers that wages can reflect the skills and productivity of workers. Workers with higher skills or productivity might earn higher wages because they are contribute more value to the employee. Roundabout, each theory is looking at how to increase workers to produce more so that the capitalist is able to profit more. As simple as that. Then came the institutional and new institutional theories. Essentially based extension of neoclassical approach, bring in institutional factors in the analysis of labor market. Till now, there were no institutional factors. They were the basic supply and demand. But now they're getting some institutional factors like caste, trade union, governance structures, also while situating labor. So they said it's not just supply and demand, there are other factors. So, for example, Uber might bring in a surge pricing, but an institution like the government can clamp down and say you cannot bring in surge pricing, like what the Delhi government did. So a supply and demand might say that Uber can bring in a surge pricing, increase price for the same, travel, just because the demand is high and supply less. But the government can bring in a law and says you cannot. So institutional factors also, or for example, caste. Some people can do a particular work and some people cannot do a particular work. Or the trade unions say that we do not want computerization in this company. For example, the trade unions resisted computerization of railways for a very long time. They felt the railways will lose, people will lose jobs. And that's possibly because the information was not shared well. People, unintended consequences, people were scared of the unintended consequences. Then there are general theories and specific labor markets. None of the above theories provide a complete and universal applicable explanation to all labor situations. So the idea of theories was, see, again, why we are doing theories? The idea of theories is to understand that obviously nothing is static. Things keep on varying. Why do things keep on varying? Based on production processes, based on the way globalization happens, based on various disruptions, and how economists try to make sense of all these disruptions and the changes which are happening. Because at the end of the day, the field of economics is to study and try and come out with some answer in terms of, and then the governments make, or the people making policies come up with some policy prescriptions based on these economic theories. Labor market theories cannot be picked off the shelf and applied. And that's where somewhere down the line, if you look at the way Indian economics is functioning, we a lot of time, and this is not just India, it's happening with a lot of developing countries. We are picking up theories or models from the West and trying to apply it on ourselves. Remember the fact societies are different, communities are different. The way we engage with something which is Western is marked different from what those people engage with those theories. So we need to always customize it based on our scheme of things, our society, and our ways we work. Given such rejection of universal applicability or received theories, what is more appropriate to arrive at a judicious mix of various theories? So one has to figure out what works best for a particular country or for a particular society. So these were the general theories of specific labor market. Marx, for example, like classical thought, gave importance to historical and long-term understanding of development in which labor assumes centrality. So Marx looked at labor as the central unit. To Marx, labor is the only commodity that creates surplus value. Now we have a new term called surplus value. So what is the surplus value? Surplus value is something which is surplus to whatever we need. So for example, if I am a farmer and I grow wheat, there is a certain amount of wheat that I would consume, me and my family. Everything else that I grow is surplus. And every surplus is something which I can sell and make a profit. So all industries go through something called surplus. So unless I have a surplus value, I will not be profitable. Marx also said driving force of capitalists is exploitation of labor. So unless the labor is exploited, Marx felt capitalism cannot work. Views exploitation begins with denial of eligible wages to the worker. One of the ways of capitalism making more money is to cut back on wages, cut back on wages. Everything that you cut back goes as profit. Along with the progress of capitalism, miseries of the working class will grow considerably, will eventually lead to a situation where working poor will triumph over. So Marx's economic theories was not only an economic theory, but a political theory. And based on Marx's political theory, the whole concept of communism and the Russian Revolution came about, where the working poor will triumph over exploiting the class to establish a new system with an egalitarian nature in nature. Unfortunately, part of the fact is, even when the working poor triumph and come into power, they again form a hierarchy, and which is what happened in the communist Russia. A hierarchy got formed among the working class. Let's look at another economist, Keynes. So I basically, again, these two slides on Marx is the basic sum of Marxism. You can add something in case, short answers on Marxism or in an assignment, you can add on to it. Keynes also, what is Keynesian economics? 2 slides to give you a short answer. Influential work, General Theory of Employment. Keynesian economic games during the post-depression, 1930s. Policy prescription to counter the negative impacts of economic crisis during the 29 and 30s. Keynesians stepped out and said that government needs to intervene in labor markets to ensure that the workers are provided with a modicum level of purchasing power. All classical, neoclassical, and other theories were more talking about government not intervening in the labor markets or with the processes, allowing the surplus, the supply demand to take care of itself. Because of the depression, Keynesian economics talks about government intervention. In fact, post 30, all governments intervene in the labor markets to ensure that the labor gets some just remuneration. The governments always, as I was telling you about Uber serve pricing, the government intervenes. Main reason for general depression, lack of effective demand. Working poor were not had sufficient purchasing power. So if you do not have people with money in their pocket and demand goes down, production goes down, unemployment goes up, you have a perfect prescription of unrest. And a unique phase of capital. So unless the mass production, capitalism is about mass production is about demand. No demand, everything goes for a toss. The poorest of the poor who have higher marginal propensity to consume need to be given more job opportunities. And that is why when Indian government came out with their famous flagship scheme of Manrega, of providing 100 days of rural employment, we suddenly saw a major shift of poor into out of poverty, because suddenly people had money in their pockets, job and money in their pockets in the villages. They did not have to travel into the urban areas, stay there and do. And what they were creating was public infrastructure like ponds, like roads. So, phenomenal scheme. Manrega still is it has been watered down, but it's still performing. It's still giving employment in the rural areas, still producing community assets. Great scheme. Are even now considered very important while designing government intervention in strengthening labor markets through initiation of employment guarantee programs or working pro. So employment guarantee programs, for example, schemes of giving money to women, giving money to working men, unemployed men, can be looked at those, but at the same time can be also looked at the factor to produce demand. At the end of the day, in the absence of demand, what who will you produce for? And it's a cyclic economy. And what we are seeing today is a depression of demand. So look at, in fact, open up your newspaper or TV or radio or go on Google to see how the demand is getting suppressed in India. For example, two-wheeler demand is getting suppressed. Cars are lying unsold. So, and look at how media projects the way labor and labor markets move. So in the 70s and the 80s, the films were being made of labor and trade unions. For example, the Amitabh Bachchan was a superhero at that time. Namak Haram, Diwar are about labor movements. How many films you see about industrial labor or labor strikes or labor movements? How many strikes, labor strikes, have you heard about lately? Post 2000. So the media also is a reflection of how the society is moving. Books, temporary people, story collection about India's guest workers in UAE, a meeting on Andheri Bridge about feminist literary work. Every woman who works as a private detective writes about Gujarat in terms of religious divide, how work is happening. Each of us killers, 2014-18, when author moved back to India for a few years, focuses on how social cultural divides like caste, how institution works the labor market, who is coming in the labor force, how does caste come as a major factor to play, drives our aspirations and struggles at workplace, how in gated communities the lifts are used class wise, how does it affects aspirations. Or for example, The Great Escape, true story of forced labor and immigrant dreams in America. In fact, we are talking forced labor in MDI 9 on human trafficking. and then a time for tea. Female tea pickers, heart of colonization, how the images distract terrible working conditions. So media always is a depiction of society. Media also gets you to understand, gets a perspective about how labor move. In fact, as I said, if you read MDI 8 first and then read MDI 7, you will see how the production processes are happening, how the world is shifting, how the way when the production processes fill, change, and disruptions happen, how the labor keeps pace, how this is leading to things like forced labor, trafficking, etc., etc. Lots of things. Okay, let's sum up. Labor central element in development process, holistic approach, all those who work manually, intellectually. Norms of neoclassical economics, labor is simply understood as four factors of production: land, capital, and entrepreneurship. Focuses on idea value of labor is related to basic needs. Efficient theory suggests employers might pay workers more than market rate. Neoclassical focuses on supply and demand. There are some references in your units. Let me stop. Hi. I hope I didn't go too fast. I tried to compress, many aspects. I also have put Marx theory and Keynesian theory much simply than what has been given in the unit. In fact, as I said, unless you are an economic student, uh, don't too much engage with the unit because it's very economic focused. Pick up some keywords, search around it and make it much simpler, because that way you will be able to answer your question papers, your end term examination, and be able to understand the concept. Any questions?
Sir,
Yeah, Sanjeev.
sir, question pertains to a different actually. Sir, there's a time constraint for us, sir. Actually, by June, we are appearing for examinations.
Okay.
And 10 subjects we have to appear, sir.
Okay.
So my earnest request is any important topic on MDI and MDI 7 and 8.
Okay.
So that we can concentrate on those subjects and
So Sanjeev, as I keep telling you, these keywords, keep noting down these keywords.
Yes.
Certain keywords, again, as I said, as I gave you within the course, nobody is going to ask you compare theories. You're not economic students.
Sir.
You're not supposed to understand this also. So if somebody might ask short notes in terms of what is classical theory or what was Marxian take on economics. So these are short notes.
Okay. Okay.
Right? As we go along, there will be certain keywords I'll keep talking about. You can keep noting down. Do not try and understand the whole aspect, because you're not expected to understand the whole aspect. The whole aspect is for you to get a sense of how things are, to enable you to understand why migration is happening.
Okay, got it, sir. Got it. Right.
So keep it simple.
Yes,
in
sir.
your mind, keep it simple. In your study, keep it simple. You will be able to then give your examination, because if you are going to think that you are doing economics major, Sanjeev,
yes, sir, I got your point.
Stuck.
I got your points.
Great. Perfect. Any other question? Okay. In case there is no other question, you'll meet me tomorrow again 12:30. We'll do MDI 8, and then at 5:30 MDI 9. We are talking about trafficking. So have one wonderful session. Have a lovely evening, and see you tomorrow at 12:30.